Pride Month is here, which is not just a celebration, it's a commemoration. A time to remember the uprising at New York's Stonewall Inn back in June of 1969. To many, that moment was a turning point in the movement for LGBTQ rights, and trans women of color played a huge role, including two icons, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Today, 52 years later, an estimated 1.4 million American adults identify as transgender, and while they'll tell you much progress has been made, they also know many challenges remain. This is TransAmerica. Hello everyone and happy Pride Month. I'm Joe Fryer. Over the next hour, we'll focus on the reasons for hope and concern for those who are transgender. We'll have in-depth conversations about politics, mental health, safety, faith, pop culture, and more. But let's begin with a look at where we are right now.
Who's with me?
It was the groundbreaking TV series with a short title and lasting legacy. This month, Pose came to a bittersweet end, but not before setting a new bar for transgender representation.
Representation is key. We haven't shattered that glass ceiling yet. It's just a bit cracked.
Visibility that's reflected in Hollywood and beyond.
I, Dr. Rachel Levine.
In the political world, Dr. Rachel Levine made history this year, becoming the first openly transgender federal official ever confirmed by the Senate.
To be nominated by the president and confirmed, I think demonstrates that how important equality and fairness is, and that anything is possible.
She now serves as Assistant Health Secretary for a Democratic president, while in California, Caitlyn Jenner hopes to become a Republican governor.
Now I enter a different kind of race, arguably my most important one yet, to save California.
Oscar-nominated actor Elliot Page recently came out as transgender, opening up to Oprah about the moments that have brought happiness.
It's being able to touch my chest and feel comfortable in my body for probably the first time.
Page recently appeared on the front of Time magazine declaring, "I'm fully who I am." 7 years earlier, actress Laverne Cox also graced Time's cover with the headline, "The Transgender Tipping Point, America's Next Civil Rights Frontier." Today, that battle is still playing out, a culture war fought in state legislatures across the country. This year alone, more than 100 anti-trans bills have been introduced in over 30 states, forcing parents to testify in defense of their transgender children.
Let them have their childhoods. Let them be who they are.
My daughter deserves to have access to the gender-affirming care she wants and needs.
Much of the legislation is focused on banning gender-affirming medical treatment or preventing trans youth from playing on sports teams that match their gender identity.
I can tell you this, in Florida, girls are going to play girls' sports and boys are going to play boys' sports. That's what we're doing.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed one such bill into law on the first day of Pride Month, while President Biden is using his pen to sign executive orders meant to protect the LGBTQ community, including an end to the transgender military ban. Just this week, the Department of Education extended Title IX protections to trans students.
For all transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, you're so brave. I want you to know your president has your back.
One of the most controversial bills this year was passed by lawmakers in Arkansas, which became the first state to restrict gender-affirming care, like puberty blockers and hormones, for transgender minors. Arkansas's Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson vetoed the bill, calling it a vast government overreach, but state lawmakers overrode that veto. Now the law could take effect in late July, but it does face a legal challenge. The ACLU filed a lawsuit on behalf of 4 Arkansas families and 2 doctors. We're now joined by all 4 of those families, 15-year-old Dylan Brandt and his mother Joanna, Amanda and Shane, parents of 9-year-old Brooke Dennis, 15-year-old Sabrina Jenin and her mom Lacey and her dad Aaron, and Donnie, father of 16-year-old Parker Saxton. I want to thank you all for joining us. Dylan, I want to start by asking you, I know you've been on testosterone for a little less than a year now. If this new law in Arkansas goes into effect, how's that going to impact you?
It could impact me in so many different ways. Since starting on my gender-affirming care, my confidence and happiness and overall mental health well-being has just shot up, and I'm doing so much better, so that it could impact that a lot.
Mom, how worried are you about this?
I'm worried. I'm trying really hard to be cautiously optimistic, but I'm worried that all of the progress that he has made could come to a halt, and that the happy, well-adjusted kid that I know now could be impacted in a negative way if this were to take effect.
Amanda, your daughter Brooke is 9 years old. I know you've already been meeting with medical providers to discuss Brooke's care down the road in the future. What worries you right now?
I mean, it's unconscionable to me that a law would make my child go through something that she just doesn't want to go through. And our doctors agree that it could put her health and safety at risk. And today, Brooke is thriving because she's able to be who she is. But this law would interfere in that. And we're scared what will happen if she can't get access to gender-affirming care in the future.
Sabrina, I know you started receiving gender-affirming care last year. What has it meant to you, and how has it changed your life?
It's allowed me to become more confident with myself and more happy with life in general. It's certainly boosted by, I guess, mood and morale. It's given me an outlook on life that, yeah, it's worth it. I can be who I want to be and not have to, have to hide anymore. It allows me to feel truly like how I want to feel.
And what happens, do you fear, if you lose that care?
I mean, it would, it would take me back to a time before I really came out. It was really depressing, and things just didn't seem worth it anymore.
Donnie, your son is 16 now, came out to you at the age of 13. To the lawmakers who say Parker's too young to make this decision and should wait until being an adult, what do you say?
These young people have grown up really fast. They've weighed every scenario in their mind, the what ifs and all of that, to the point that they know more about life than most of us adults do, to be honest with you.
I have a question for all of you. Show of hands, who would consider moving out of Arkansas if this law does go into effect? So all the families would consider moving out. Dylan, Joanna, I'll ask you first. What are your options? Where would you go to? What would you do?
Honestly, I'm not sure. After the bill was initially passed, I spent a good deal of time Googling. I was terrified. And so I did spend a lot of time looking into our options of where we could live. But to be quite honest, it's going to be, or it would be, if this happens, a big financial burden on my family if we had to pull up stakes and go somewhere else, not only because I've got a business and we've got a home and the kids have friends and family here, but where are we going to go that this couldn't then happen there? So it's scary. I mean, I will do what I need to do for my family and my son. But why should we have to leave when everything that we need is right here? We're getting great medical care right here. We shouldn't have to go anywhere.
Sabrina, what would moving mean to you? I'm guessing you have friends and things that you're involved with there. How hard would it be for you to move?
I mean, it's one of those things where I'm able to keep in touch with them online, and I'm just, already considering options, especially since college is just around the door. I'm highly considering just not doing anything in state whatsoever, because it's a toxic environment for me, and I don't appreciate that.
And Donnie, I'll ask you, what would be your options for moving?
Well, I'm not sure, really. I just know that this is shelter. Our community is pretty much, it's a small community, so they're basically transitioning with us, and the thought of having to leave shelter for the unknown is pretty scary.
Dylan, tell me, in the last year, what has brought you joy?
My care, honestly. That in the last year, I have met some amazing people. I have started this incredible care. And so those two things have really helped me. I have an amazing support system through all of this. I have friends who will randomly text me and tell me that they love me and that they're proud of me and all of this. And that has really helped me through all of this, especially everything going on with the lawsuit and everything. I know that people have my back, and that's one of the best feelings in the whole world. So it really opens the door to a whole world of opportunities and possibilities when you're not hiding within yourself.
Thank you to all 4 families for joining us to talk about this case. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we just focused on one law in one state. Let's zoom out now and take a look at the bigger picture when it comes to this wave of legislation. MSNBC anchor Candace Gibson breaks down which states are considering these bills and where some have already become law.
This year alone, 8 states have passed anti-LGBTQ laws. Several others are also considering bills that will impact the community. And an overwhelming majority of those laws target transgender Americans. Let's start with gender-affirming healthcare for transgender youth. These laws could limit or ban hormone therapies or gender confirmation surgeries. Arkansas State Senate notably overrode the governor's veto to pass the law in April.
House Bill 1570 would put the state as the definitive oracle of medical care, overriding parents, patients, and healthcare experts.
2 states have seen bills introduced that restrict trans people from using bathrooms or locker rooms that match their gender identity. Tennessee's governor signing that bill into law in May. When it comes to transgender kids in sports, the number of bills is skyrocketing. At least 28 state legislatures have introduced bills banning transgender kids from playing on teams that match their gender identity. Alabama, Arkansas, Montana, Tennessee, and West Virginia have all passed these types of laws. And here in Florida, some are calling the governor a bigot following a couple of moves he's made this June alone, including a ban on trans athletes that he signed into law on the very first day of Pride. While an increasing number of these bills are being signed into law, some lawmakers backing the bills have struggled to cite examples in their own states.
Can you name one example of a transgender child trying to gain an unfair competitive advantage at a school there in West Virginia?
Well, Stephanie, I don't have that experience exactly to myself right now, but I will tell you this.
Not yourself, your state, sir. Can you give me one example of a transgender child trying to get an unfair advantage? Just one in your state. You signed a bill about it.
No, I can't really tell you one.
Montana is the only state to have considered and passed a law for changing sex designations on birth certificates. The law states that sex markers can only be changed after a court gets proof of gender confirmation surgery. Other states like New York require a letter signed by a mental health professional or social worker to certify an official gender change.
Let's take a closer look at this legislation with our panel. Sarah McBride made history in 2020, becoming the first openly transgender state senator in U.S. history. She serves in Delaware. Raquel Willis is a transgender activist and writer. State Representative Brian Sims serves in the Pennsylvania House. He was the first openly gay man elected state legislator in that state's history. And Joe Yerkeba is associate editor at NBC Out. They have been extensively covering this legislation over the past several months. Raquel, I want to talk about these sports bans at first. Have been passed now in several states. The lawmakers pushing this legislation, they argue it's about fairness, saying that transgender girls have an unfair advantage. But we've reached out to all the governors who signed these bills to ask if they can name any examples in their state, one example of someone with an unfair advantage. No one has provided us with any of these examples. So in your mind, what's going on here?
Yes, well, I think it's clear that they're trying to make a problem out of no problem. As we saw a few years ago, the bathroom bills kind of fight that they tried to start really didn't go anywhere. And I think now they're trying to find a new testing ground to see how they can come after our community. So we have to continue to raise up the fact that none of this is based in facts and it's all about bigotry.
Senator McBride, why do you think all this is happening right now?
I think this is happening right now because these politicians realize that the clock is ticking on their bigotry, that this is essentially the last opportunity for them to push forward anti-trans policies. And they're targeting trans youth for several reasons, but more than any other reason, they understand that the trans youth of today are the trans advocates, the trans activists, the change makers of today and tomorrow. And they are trying to make life so difficult for these trans youth that they never grow up to be trans adults.
So, Senator, if we remove the politicians from this and maybe just look at the public and public opinion, I saw one poll that said 2/3 of Americans oppose these sports bans. I saw one that says 2/3 support them. So it's hard to fully gauge maybe what the country thinks. But I do think there are people out there, even within the LGBTQ community, who think that maybe it does seem on the surface like transgender girls would have an unfair advantage. What would be your message to those Americans who do have questions about this issue?
Well, first, I think what's clear is that the data and the science doesn't demonstrate that. But more than that, this is about kids being kids. This is about allowing our young people to fully and equally participate in public life, including all school programs. High school athletics, middle school programs, these allow kids to learn teamwork. They allow kids to pursue a passion. This is about letting kids be kids. And I think when people understand at the end of the day that this is simply about kids being able to have the same access to the same opportunities in school as everyone else, I think they come to the side of fairness and equality. And I think more broadly, while people may have questions, what we have seen time and time again on these issues is that every single time anti-transgender politicians put forward these policies, there may be questions from the public at the start. There may even be questions within the community at the start. But we end up having a conversation with our community and our country that serves to open hearts, change minds, and in the end sows the seeds of the destruction of the politics of hate that they seek to implement.
Representative Sims, you're in Pennsylvania, where Republicans control the House and Senate, and some lawmakers there have expressed interest in pushing bills targeting the trans community. But you also have a Democratic governor who said, well, I'm going to veto that. That's not the case in every state, and more of these bills will likely be passed. So in your mind, what does need to happen next?
We see these types of bills, as we did with the bathroom bills, that are really trying to separate the trans community from the larger LGBT communities in a way that will slow down the progress towards non-discrimination. And, I think that one of the ways to combat them, as you heard from Senator McBride, is information. The truth of the matter is advocates of these types of legislation have picked two areas, trans people in bathrooms and trans people in sports, where there is virtually no science or medicine or data to back up their position. And I think that's really critically important for all of us to remember and to speak out about.
Now, Joe, in the past, we've seen corporations and sports organizations apply pressure. About 5 years ago, North Carolina passed a so-called bathroom bill. In response, the NCAA said it would no longer hold championship events there. And in response, North Carolina did repeal the bill. Is anything like that happening this year? What are we hearing from the NCAA?
Yeah, so dozens of corporations have already spoken out against these bills, including Google, Facebook, AT&T, and the NCAA has also spoken out. In April, when 4 states, it was just 3 this year, had passed trans athlete bans, the NCAA issued a statement backing trans athletes and saying that it would only hold championship tournaments in places that are, quote, free from discrimination. But then about a month later in May, the NCAA announced that schools that would host championships for softball, 3 of them were in states that have passed trans athlete bans: Alabama, Arkansas, and Tennessee. And after criticism from LGBTQ advocacy organizations, they issued another statement that said they're willing to monitor the effective dates of the bans, which advocates have said implies to them that the NCAA is willing to hold championship games in these states that have passed bans, but only if the bans haven't taken effect yet.
Raquel, are you satisfied with what the NCAA and corporations are doing? Is it enough? Do you want to see more?
Oh, I definitely want to see more. I think we need more and more companies, corporations speaking out. And of course, we need institutions like the NCAA to actually hold strong and fast to what their commitments have been. And so that means not trying to add all of these extra stipulations around supporting trans youth. You have to actually be there. You have to actually live into your commitment for trans athletes, especially in this time. So I definitely want to see more, and I also want to see more lawmakers speaking out. You know, I imagine this year how different it would be if we had seen upwards of 100 pieces of legislation to protect trans people and our rights versus the opposite side. So I think we definitely need more action on the side of the people who support our community.
All right. I want to thank all of you for joining us for this important panel delving into the politics and legal response to all of this. Thank you so much. These aren't just state issues. At the federal level, the Equality Act is before Congress. The bill would make it illegal to discriminate against gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people in most settings. The act already passed in the House, but in the Senate, it would need the support of 10 Republican senators to get around the filibuster. Earlier this year, a 16-year-old from Washington State made history when she expressed her support for the Equality Act, becoming the first transgender teenager to testify in front of the Senate. Her name is Stella Keating, and she hopes her testimony, which went viral, by the way, is just the beginning of a long and successful political career.
Hi, I'm Stella, and I'm transgender. I'm here before you today representing the hundreds of thousands of kids just like me who are supported and loved by their family, friends, and communities across the country.
I realize it was over Zoom, it wasn't in person, but still, what was that moment like for you in that moment?
Barely slept the night before, and then I had finally logged on and everything, and when I had logged on, just a calm just kind of came over me. And I kind of realized after feeling that calm and after that I think I felt that way and just so confident and calm because I had a sense of purpose. And it was a really incredible feeling because I could also just feel all the love that people were sending to me and all the support that I was getting from people. It was really amazing.
You were testifying about the Equality Act, which is a piece of legislation that would give LGBTQ people federal protection from discrimination when it comes to housing, health care, education, employment, and more. It's passed the House. It has an uphill battle in the Senate. Why is this act so important to you?
Well, I'm a sophomore, and I'm pretty soon I'm going to be a junior next year, and I'm going to start looking at colleges. And I want to make sure that I go to the college that's right for me and that I do the best learning in. It's scary to think about the fact that I might be able to find the perfect college for me, but I won't be safe there. What the Equality Act means for me is that I will be able to get the education that I want and that I need. I just want to live my life. I just want to be treated as a normal kid because I'm not that different. I just have one small little detail about me that's slightly different than majority of other teens, and that's just that I'm transgender.
You're involved with something called the Gender Cool Project. What is that? Tell us about it.
It started out as kind of a storytelling campaign, telling the stories of who transgender kids, not of who we are as transgender people, not what we are. Now our goal is to create positive experiences meeting transgender and non-binary youth who are thriving. And because so often people will create opinions about us without ever getting to know us. And so our goal is to try and say, well, wait, hold on. We're actually really happy and thriving. And we're also just like your kids. We're not that different.
I know you're only 16, but do you have an idea of what you want to do when you're older? Any desires to be a politician or run for office?
Very much so. I am in hope. I hope I hope to go to law school for my undergrad, and I want to be a civil rights attorney to amplify voices that need it.
I know you're a big fan of State Senator Sarah McBride, who we've talked to for this special. How much does Senator McBride inspire you?
So much so. I love Sarah so much. I'm excited to say that she's also a dear friend. But Sarah means just so much to me. I was so excited when she was when she won her election, because she is paving the way for me to be the first transgender president of the United States. That's what Sarah means to me. She's just a powerful force of good that makes me so happy to think about. And yeah.
Still ahead, victims of anti-trans violence, the sobering statistics and their stories in their own words. Their partners, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, all people who were loved and sadly living an authentic life may have led to their deaths. This troubling trend is showing no signs of stopping. As of this month, at least 28 transgender or gender nonconforming people had been murdered in 2021. Most are Black or Latinx. At this pace, it will be another record year for violence. Here's our Aaron Gilchrist with a closer look.
These are the faces of the fallen, just some of the transgender and gender nonconforming men and women whose lives were cut short. The first 5 months of 2021 saw 27 trans or non-binary people shot to death or killed by other violent means. Among them, Tiana Alexander, a 28-year-old Black trans woman from Chicago who was shot to death on January 6th. Just a month later, 16-year-old trans boy J.J. Bright and his 22-year-old non-binary sibling Jasmine Canaday were shot and killed. Their mother is in jail, charged with their murders. We may never have a true grasp of just how many murders and assaults on trans people there really are. Many go unreported or misreported. A 2012 Lambda Legal National Survey finds 32% of transgender or gender nonconforming people reported police officers' attitudes toward them were hostile. What we do know is there is a surge in violence against transgender and gender nonconforming people. It's up 266% from this point last year, and it may only get worse from here. A March 2021 study from the UCLA School of Law Williams Institute finds trans people are over 4 times more likely to experience violent crime, including sexual assault. Overcoming the violence starts with people overcoming the stigma surrounding trans and non-binary people.
Let's bring in Tatiana Williams, a transgender woman and executive director of the Trans Inclusive Group, Quentin Bell, a transgender man and executive director of the Knights and Orchids Society, and Gia Love, a Black transgender woman, model, actress, and activist. Thank you all for joining us for this incredibly important topic. Tatiana, I do want to start with you. I know you've experienced this surge in violence against trans women firsthand. Can you tell us a little more about what happened to your daughter?
Of course, I've experienced the surge in violence against transgender individuals myself, being a victim of intimate partner violence, experiencing a lot of things just in my lifetime as a transgender woman. What I would say, what happened with my daughter is she was brutally murdered in her home in North Miami, and she was stabbed to death. Till this day, we have not found who did this. We do not have a suspect. And trying to work with law enforcement has definitely been difficult. However, it's important that we bring awareness to this. But yes, she was brutally murdered in her home.
I'm so sorry to hear about your loss, losing your daughter to such senseless violence. And I know, as you mentioned, you're worried about violence against yourself as well. Can you tell us a little more about your worries?
Just navigating as a woman of trans experience and being Black in America in itself, you know, every time I walk out of the door, I'm afraid if I would make it back alive. When you think about the age limit when it comes to Black trans women or trans women of color, our age expectancy is 35 years old. So when you think about that and all the things that I have experienced just in my life and my friends have experienced, yes, I'm always afraid, and I don't feel protected by our government. I don't feel protected by law enforcement. So definitely I'm always afraid, hoping that I make it back home safe.
Quentin, at this rate, it will be another record year for murders against transgender and gender nonconforming people. I know it's complex, but can you tell us what are some of the main reasons behind the violence that we see?
People don't see us as human beings. People don't believe that our lives have value, and they oftentimes will portray in a way in the media that's not consistent with us thriving, not consistent with us having higher life expectations. The violence is senseless. Senseless violence is oftentimes because of ignorance, lack of knowledge about trans people. A lot of times, particularly in the South, Religion plays a big part in that. Intersectional factors, rurality plays a big part in that. People just don't have the knowledge. People say that they don't interact with trans people. They say that we're not visible, but it's hard to be visible when you don't feel safe. It's hard to be visible when you're worried about getting home, when you're worried about eating, if you're worried about having shelter and clothing. There's a lot of disparities that contribute to the violence, but education goes a long way. Empathy goes a long way.
Quentin, you talked about some of the disparities. I mean, we know transgender people are more likely to be discriminated against in employment and in housing, which means they're more likely to experience homelessness or to lose a job. And that can just open the door to sometimes dangerous, unstable situations, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you live in a society where the average income, according to a 2016 survey, is less than $24,000 a year, I know trans people who are trying to survive off of $12,000 a year, off $8,000 a year. I know trans people, I got my second eviction by making sure that a community of trans folks had a place to live, making sure what we call couch surfing, making sure that people who only came through with a trash bag full of belongings had a place to lay down. They had a hot meal that they could get because we didn't have anywhere else to go. So housing is a major issue.
Gia, we know this violence disproportionately impacts trans women of color. I want to try to talk about solutions here. I mean, in your mind, what needs to change?
I think that change comes from breaking down the binary and allowing people to just live our lives. You know, we can rely on like the government, but the government is not doing what needs to be done. Grassroots organizations and trans organizations on the ground are really stepping up and supporting community, and people who support trans people are giving funding to Black trans-led organizations that are providing direct assistance to community. So until we get rid of and eradicate binary politics, heteronormativity, and really address the social determinants of health within our own community, we will continue to be on the margins and experience violence at a disproportionate rate.
Gia, we've seen the number of murders go up, but are there areas where things have improved? Is there anything you're seeing that really is working?
Yeah, I think that the mobilization of the community is definitely in the right direction. And I want the community to continue the fight that we are doing. We have been vigilant. We have been staying on course to fight against the egregious violence that we are facing.
Tatiana Williams, Quentin Bell, Gia Love, I want to thank you all for joining us for this important conversation. And now let's take a moment to reflect and remember the trans lives we've lost so far this year. Up next, trans families, parents standing by their kids united in a show of support, and the mental health concerns for those simply trying to be their true selves.
We don't want to find out that our child has become a statistic.
After more than 15 years in Little Rock, the Spurrier family is crossing state lines.
I actually just got back from Albuquerque last night
to provide a better environment for their 17-year-old son. Cass Spurrier came out to his family as transgender in 2019, then started the process of figuring out what's next with the help of medical professionals.
I mean, we had a whole team constructed.
His confidence has skyrocketed with the testosterone. He is himself.
But just as his parents, Emily and George, started seeing these changes,
the bill's passed.
The SAFE Act, prohibiting any kind of chemical or surgical treatment for transgender youth under 18, became law.
We got the message loud and clear. Arkansas, my family is no longer welcome in this state.
They say they're happy to be in a place where their son can fully be himself.
We're looking forward to it being a place where he can flourish.
That's just one example of the lengths some families are now going to so they can care for the physical and mental health of their transgender children. Other families live in states where they don't have to worry about the laws, but still deal with bullying and discrimination on a regular basis. We sat down with a few families from across the country to hear their stories and perspectives. Sam Bassett, a 16-year-old transgender child, and their mother, Heather, who live in Nevada. Phoenix, a 16-year-old transgender boy, and mom Rain in North Carolina. Shannon Callahan, the mother of an 8-year-old transgender boy in Florida. And Elizabeth Haley, the mother of a 14-year-old trans boy. They live in Georgia, but usually travel to Tennessee for health care. I want to start by focusing on something positive. So, Sam, tell me right now, what brings you joy?
I'd say love and support from people around me, just having, a generally good support system set in place so that we're all open and helping each other out.
Heather, do you see that happiness right now?
I do, and it's been a struggle. It's been a while. We've gone through, transitions over the last year or so. There's depression and suicidal ideation, but just by changing our environment and changing the direction of our goals and getting the support system that Sam needs, I can see this smile. So that's all that matters to me.
Phoenix, tell me, what brings you happiness right now?
Well, I'd say art. I'm an artist and I love to draw, I love to paint, I like to listen to music, and maybe sometimes all three at the same time. And I notice that whenever I draw smiling faces, smiling characters, I find myself smiling. So it just brings me a lot of happiness.
The last year or two, what's it been like for you?
Definitely had a lot of ups and downs. Of course, nothing's going to be perfect, but a lot of progress has happened in the last couple of years. I guess we're all just on this journey together, and we're able to talk to each other, and we're not trying to hide things from each other anymore. But finally, I've kind of been able to express myself and finally kind of get some relief.
It evolved out of the cocoon into a beautiful butterfly.
Shannon, you're the mother of an 8-year-old transgender boy. You live in Florida, where the governor just signed legislation that would keep trans girls from playing sports with other girls. That may not directly impact your son, but when you see all these bills being debated around the country, what goes through your mind?
When we sign our kids up for sports at a young age, we're not doing it for them to become professional athletes. We're doing it so they can learn self-discipline and leadership and experience pride and learn how to cope with failure. It allows them to work in a team of people that are different from them. A trans child shouldn't be denied that opportunity.
Tennessee has passed a number of laws targeting the transgender community just this year, including bathroom bills and sports bans. What is your message to lawmakers there in Tennessee and across the country?
Our kids and trans people are normal people. Making it difficult to participate in sports is really challenging to young people. That's a normal rite of passage for our teenagers. And when it comes to legislation surrounding healthcare, it's important that our doctors and our psychiatrists and our specialists who have gone to school for many, many years and have researched in depth and have peer review processes are the ones who make decisions for our children and not legislators who don't have the same experience.
Sam, are sports important to you just for a fun outlet?
I mean, for a fun outlet, for, keeping myself fit and happy and healthy. It's a big part of my life.
Shannon, as a mom, what would you want other parents to know?
that what these children go through is as real as what any other kid goes through. You know, the more that they hear these laws passing and the more that they hear all the negativity, you know, the more they internalize that, and it harms their mental health. And these trans girls, trans boys, they deserve every opportunity and every respect that cisgender kids have.
Our kids are normal. They're just like everyone else's kids. There are a lot more trans and non-binary kids than you might know.
Phoenix, what's your message to those who don't understand what life is like for transgender kids?
Well, I have different messages for people who don't understand versus people who don't accept, because there's a big difference there. For people who don't understand, it's natural. It's natural to not fully understand because all of us are totally different. None of us have the same journey, and none of us will ever live by the same set of rules. The only difference between us is that we had to work a little bit harder for the body that we feel comfortable in, and we're all human. And for people who don't accept us, all I ask is why? There's no reason, because in the end of it all, we're human.
We're all the same.
Yeah, we're real, we're valid, and we're human.
As you just heard, mental health is a huge concern for families. Experts say that transgender youth face higher rates of depression and anxiety. This year's survey by the Trevor Project found more than half of transgender and non-binary youth have seriously considered attempting suicide in just the last year. If you or anyone you know is struggling, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255 or text TALK to 741-741. Let's bring in Dr. Jack Turbin, a child and adolescent psychiatry fellow at the Stanford University School of Medicine, and Dallas Ducar, founding CEO of Trans Health Northampton. Thank you both for joining us. Dr. Turbin, first, I just want to ask, when we see all of this legislation in more than 30 states right now targeting transgender youth, the headlines, the political rhetoric, all of it, what kind of mental health impact does that have on trans kids?
Yeah, it's really difficult to watch right now. And I think on the one hand, we think a lot about the impact of the bills themselves. So it's dangerous for these kids to be potentially losing medical care. It's dangerous for them to be kicked out of sports and losing the physical and mental health benefits of sports. But really, I think the biggest danger is something outside of the direct impact of the bills. And the real danger is that these kids are seeing powerful people, like politicians, going on national television and basically telling them that they're confused about their identity, that they're a risk to their friends in sports, that they can't be in bathrooms because they're a risk to other people. And over time, if you hear that over and over again, kids start to believe it and they start to internalize it.
Dallas, I was struck by what a doctor in Arkansas said this year while testifying before lawmakers. She said there have been multiple kids in the emergency room for attempted suicide since the bill was introduced. I guarantee if this bill passes, children will die. And she added, I will call you every single time. Now, sadly, this is not being overly dramatic, is it? This is a reality.
As a trans woman, I can tell you that it's not overly dramatic. Gender-affirming care is life-saving. We know this. Denying people gender-affirming care will result in death for patients that Dr. Turbin and I see every day. The most concerning risk of limiting access to gender-affirming care is the risk of suicide. Let me be clear, the passing of these bills will harm trans lives.
Just like Dallas is saying, we see over and over again in research studies that when kids have access to gender-affirming medical care, they have better mental health. So we published a study last year in the journal Pediatrics, which compared people who accessed puberty blockers, for instance, with people who wanted puberty blockers but could not access them. And those who accessed the puberty blockers had a lower odds of considering suicide in their lifetime. And that's just one of many studies that over and over again are showing that for some kids, these interventions really can save their lives.
Dr. Turbin, for the parents and caretakers of transgender kids who are living in states that are passing some of these laws, they might be anxious, they might be worried. What's your message to them?
to keep in mind that your kids are hearing these powerful politicians again saying things that are really damaging to kids' mental health. So they're telling your child that they're dangerous, that they can't be in bathrooms, that they're confused and shouldn't receive medical interventions. And what you can do is sit down with your child and say, you know, this politician doesn't know you. They don't really know what they're talking about. Like, I know you. I love you, and you're an amazing child who is great to your friends, you're compassionate, you're not confused, and just give the kids that messaging that counteracts some of this negative messaging.
Dallas, you know, we've talked about a lot of challenges, maybe some negatives, but I want to ask you, just doing the work you do, why is it so important to you to be doing this right now?
Well, it is so important because we know that an estimated, 65% of LGBTQ folks have pre-existing health conditions, and trans folks experience higher rates of health conditions, unemployment, more likely to not be seen by a primary care provider or a mental health provider. And so we really need to be expanding gender-affirming care. For me as a trans woman, this is really, really impactful work. I transitioned in the rural South, where I oftentimes was in fear for my life. And I didn't have access to the care that I desperately needed, the life-saving care that I needed.
Well, Dallas Dukar, Dr. Jack Turbin, we are so grateful for everything that you are doing and for taking a few minutes to speak with us about this important issue. Thank you both so very much. When we come back, breaking barriers, one-on-one with the star of the hit FX series Pose, MJ Rodriguez, and how she says pop culture is putting a crack in a glass ceiling.
I'm a very optimistic person by nature, but I've got no illusions about the outside world having my back.
Outside world?
My community and the outside world and all those things.
I know, Blanca. You don't have to pretend with me.
So you've been with a girl like me before?
No, it's not like that. You're a beautiful, funny, soulful woman. That's all that matters to me.
That's MJ Rodriguez, star of the award-winning TV series Pose, which came to an end this month after 3 historic and successful seasons. The show was groundbreaking because most of the actors and characters were transgender, including Rodriguez, who's now embarking on a musical career under the name Michaela J, with a new song called Something to Say. I spoke with Rodriguez about the future and about the legacy of Pose. Pose came to an end this month. How are you feeling about that?
I'm feeling great, but I'm also feeling extremely emotional. What a show to be a part of. What a great way to tie all of the knots, cross the T's, dot the I's. I've been a ball of tears in my own little private, moments. And Pose has changed so many people's life around the world now. Now we can say this is like a show that is going to go down in history. It's going to stay, and people will be able to refer back to this whenever they need some kind of guidance or they need some kind of love.
Even after Pose, GLAAD says that right now 21 transgender characters remain on TV. How important is representation?
Representation is key. We haven't shattered that glass ceiling yet. It's just a bit cracked. And there's great things in knowing that, and there's also sad things in knowing that, it hasn't fallen to the ground just yet. We should be worrying about other things, and it's unfortunate that we have to because, like I said, that glass hasn't shattered yet. But it's cracked. It's cracked. So that means there is some work being done.
On the flip side of TV, I think GLAAD found in 2019 there wasn't a single transgender character in any movie produced by the 8 biggest studios. When you hear that, what do you think?
Oh, it just makes me sad to know that there weren't any. And it goes to show that, there are still people who have ideals of where we should be and how we should be placed in the world.
When you were a kid, what do you think a show like Pose would have meant to you?
Would a show like Pose possibly happening in my time would have changed my whole life. And I'm so glad that a show like this, where I can say I wish I would have had it, now the kids have it. Take the way we feel it, take the walls out, break the
You've got a new song out. How does that feel?
It feels great. So I went to school for music. That was my first love, my first passion, still is. It's been a dream of mine. It's been a passion of mine. And I have a song called Something to Say. And what a way to release a song on Pride. What a way to have something to say. Like, I feel like it all came into place, like how it needed to come into place. And it just feels good.
The song is called Something to Say. What can you say about Something to Say?
That we have more in common than we actually realized. And that goes for people who are people of color, goes for people who are LGBTQAI. It runs the gamut when it comes to all communities. If we collectively and cohesively come together through love, then we can really push the needle forward. And not to mention getting people up and moving their bodies, because like, you gotta make sure people are moving.
We were talking about representation on screen. What does representation look like in the music world right now?
I just want to be on that forefront. I love making sure I knock down the walls. I like knocking on the door and saying, can I come in? Oh, you're not gonna let me in? Okay, well, I'm just gonna open this real quick, say hello. I'm okay, I come in peace. E.T. phone home, no.
As you embark on this next chapter of your career, I mean, what's your biggest wish? What would be the biggest goal?
The biggest goal for me would to be able to go on tour and to travel and see so many lovely faces that I've never seen before around the world who have invested themselves in me. I feel good. I feel so welcome in this space. And yeah, just yes, and yes, with an exclamation point on top of it.
From MJ to AJ. For nearly 30 years, AJ McLean has been larger than life as 1/5 of the mega boy band, the Backstreet Boys. Now McLean is using his powerful platform to celebrate the trans community. He released a solo single called Love Song Love. A longtime LGBTQ ally, McLean says the goal of the song is to promote discussion and awareness of the fight for equality with the message, love no matter what.
And you want that love song love.
Over the past hour, you've heard from kids, parents, lawmakers, and advocates who've dedicated their lives to the transgender community. And I hope during that time you were able to simply sit back and listen to what they had to say. Listen to the teenager who dreams of becoming America's first transgender president. Listen to Quentin Bell, who told us that empathy, that getting to know people, can go a long way. Listen to the mother who says her 16-year-old son has evolved out of the cocoon into a beautiful butterfly. I can't think of a better image to leave you with. I'm Joe Fryer, and from all of us here at NBC News Now and NBC Out, thank you for watching. Good night.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.